Hi, everyone. Today, our stories include harrowing accounts from two girls driving home from a music festival, as well as an FBI agent working from home. What they all experienced changes their outlook on what they thought they knew was real. So while you anticipate the time we're about to spend together, please don't forget to click that subscribe button and share this with a good friend. Great. Now let's get into the stories. Hi, Lilith. I've been excited to share my story with you because I think it's a bit different than all the rest I've ever heard. You see, even though I have had several encounters with some really strange things in my life that I can't really put into words, I've never been afraid of them. I feel protected by them, actually. But one day in the fall of 2015, I had an encounter that was a little different from those others, mainly because of how the thing I encountered acted towards me. At the time, I was 20 years old and lived in a house on the outskirts of Saugus, California. I had left my parents' home and was renting this place with two other girlfriends, one whose name was Roxy. It was 1 in the morning, and Roxy and I were driving home after going to see some friends play at a music festival near LA. I was driving because Roxy's car was in the shop, and anyway, she always liked when I drove. We were blasting music while we drove when suddenly she said, "Hey, what's that?" At first I didn't know what she meant, but I saw her looking back behind us, so I glanced in the rearview mirror and then I saw it too. Something moving behind us along the side of the highway, darting in and out next to the guardrail. It looked like a big dog or maybe even a coyote. But why that didn't make sense was that it was walking on 2 legs, and it was fast. It was keeping pace with us, even though it was staying about 50 yards behind. I slowed down a bit so we could get a better look and see exactly what was going on, and that's when I heard Roxy yell, "It's coming at us!" Sure enough, the thing started running even more quickly, towards our car now that we were slowing down. And the image that really sticks in my mind about this part was that it looked like it was grinning, or maybe smirking in a way it knew it had the upper hand. I'm not sure why it was making that expression, but either way, the mouth looked insane. And just as we were trying to get a good look at it, it passed under one of those big lights along the side of the road, and I could see that this thing was not a normal animal at all. I could now even see horns that I hadn't been able to make out when it was further back. And I know this sounds crazy, but they looked like goat horns. The creature was about 6 feet tall, though, with dark brown fur all over its body, except for these white parts of skin showing in some spots, like around the eyes. And another confusing part was that I could now see that it was actually running on its toes. Or when I say that, I mean it looked like it was running with its feet pointed down, or maybe it had hooves or something like that. All I could think was that this thing had come straight from the devil. Later, Roxy said she thought the same thing, which makes me think we were correct about that, even though I don't know how we both had the same random thought at the same time. One thing is for sure, though, it scared the hell out of both of us, especially when it started to make these strange sounds. At first, I thought it was growling, but then I realized that the sounds were not growls, but that they had some sort of a regulated cadence. I honestly then thought that this creature was speaking to me in an unknown language, at least unknown to me. Roxy said she could hear it too, but all she heard were buzzing sounds and couldn't decide if she thought it was actually a language or not. But whatever this thing did with its voice made my car shake and made it difficult for me to stay in control. It was at this point that I floored it, and I sped off as fast as I could back to our house. Once we got home, Roxy ran inside to use the bathroom, and she barfed everywhere. She was so sick from what had happened. But for whatever reason, I now wasn't scared. I was actually excited. Roxy thought I was completely crazy and made that very clear as we told our other roommate all about what had happened. We had woken her up. But as we told her, she became super worried that something might have followed us home, and she couldn't stop thinking that it could be lurking around the house. Now, I thought that idea was crazy, but she seemed scared enough that we all went outside to check. We went out with flashlights and looked all over the place. I even kept my mace in my hand, just in case, but we didn't see anything unusual. However, we did hear strange noises coming from the hillside across the street from us. It sounded like a cross between a dog barking and this weird moaning sound. The whole thing totally freaked us out, so we all went back inside and locked up tight for the night. A few days later, Roxy got her car back from the shop and started driving herself places again. She then told me that while she was driving home one night from work, she saw that same creature, she thinks, standing on top of a hill near where we had seen it before. She said it was just standing there, looking at her, and she had to drive past it and hold it all together, hoping the whole time that it didn't react to her or recognize her. Obviously, I don't know why that thing was there, but I'm glad Roxy got through it okay. As for me, I haven't seen that devil creature again since that night, but I do feel the presence of some really strange energies in the areas around our house. I'm convinced that I'm sensing the creature's presence. I'm sort of like that anyway, really sensitive to energies and things, and I'm not really afraid, just curious. Thanks for listening to my story. If you want, you can use my name, Christine, on your site if you think it's okay and safe to do so. I look forward to seeing if you post this or not, and also what other people think about it. Thank you, Lilith. This story comes to us from a man who wishes to remain anonymous for obvious reasons. He's a former FBI agent turned cryptid hunter who decided to dedicate his life to proving the existence that these elusive creatures exist. It was just another day at work. I was going through the motions, doing my job, and not expecting anything out of the ordinary to happen. Of course, who does expect anything to happen that's not part of their typical day? At the time, I was working as an FBI agent, and I was assigned to a case that had me completely stumped. I'd been working on it for weeks, trying to find clues or leads that could help me solve it, or even just move forward a bit. But nothing was leading anywhere despite everything I tried, and I was extremely frustrated. So, on the night in question, I was in my home office late at night. I was divorced and lived alone, and I would often find myself unable to sleep. On those nights, I would head to my office to work. So that night, I was going through the files and hoping for a breakthrough when I heard a noise that was unusual. It was just different enough from anything I was used to hearing around the house that it caught my attention. Plus, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. It sounded like something heavy was hitting the ground, and it was coming from the big open yard behind the house. I stood up and cocked my head to the side to try and pinpoint the location, but as I listened closer, I realized that it sounded like it was much closer to the house, like basically right outside the kitchen door. I stepped away from my desk and moved towards my office door. My office was just down the hall from the kitchen, and so I opened the office door slowly and stepped out to investigate. But first, I listened again to be sure I knew the direction it was coming in. And sure enough, I heard it again. I started to make my way to the kitchen, and as I got closer, the noise got louder. I reached the kitchen and I looked towards the door. The noise had gone silent now, almost like whatever was making it knew I was tracking it. But I needed to get to the bottom of this, and so I slowly and very quietly opened the door to the outside. And when I did, I could not grasp what I was seeing. Standing just outside the kitchen door and moving around and making the noise I had heard earlier was a creature. That's the best I can categorize it. A creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was about 7 feet tall, and it was totally covered in fur. It had a long snout with sharp teeth protruding out at odd angles. The creature turned towards me when it heard the door open, almost like it instinctively knew I was there, because I was 100% quiet when I opened the door. The thing focused on me intently with rage in its eyes, and it started coming at me, screeching and howling and hissing so that saliva was flying everywhere. I stepped back inside and shut the door to put some distance between me and it. I had to think fast and determine a suitable plan of action. I decided to head back to my office, where I closed the door and locked it behind me. I then proceeded to listen through the doorway, and it wasn't long before I heard the sounds of the creature breaking into the house through the kitchen door. And now I really had to calculate quickly, but I knew how to act fast, and so I pulled out my gun and aimed it down the hallway as I slowly opened the door and positioned myself out of sight. I could hear, but not see the creature in the kitchen. I listened as it was moving around with a lot of force, banging and stepping heavily. I could also hear it growling and snorting as it moved around. It sounded like something from a horror movie, honestly. I thought that if I just stayed quiet enough, it might just leave, which would have been the optimal outcome. I listened to it for a while in the kitchen, but then I heard it go into the dining room. And now it sounded like it was just destroying things in there. I could hear glass breaking and furniture being moved around. It seemed to be very angry. Finally, I opened my office door all the way and stepped out into the hallway again. I slowly walked towards the dining room this time with my gun still raised. As soon as I got close and turned the corner, it turned its head towards me and instantly started to growl menacingly. It had a look on its face like it wanted to tear me apart right there. For a second, I thought for sure this was how I was going to die, but instead of rushing and attacking me, it suddenly went silent. And then I watched as it rushed back to the kitchen and it hurled itself out through the back door. I didn't know what to think at that point. On one hand, I was relieved that it had left, but at the same time, I somehow felt that this meant there was a war between us. And so I decided then and there that I would find out more about this thing. To be honest, my confusion and fear then turned into anger. I wanted to know who or what this thing was and why it had come into my home and destroyed it. Since that day, I've done a lot of research, mainly on the internet, but it was difficult finding anything that really matched what happened. Like the way it came into my house and started breaking things. That seemed to be unusual. But just like many of the other descriptions, this thing was bipedal and had pointed ears and canine-like teeth. It also had a very strong odor that I can still smell in my memory. I'm not sure what this means, but I really feel that there is some kind of a connection between those creatures and myself now. And so I will continue my research until I find out more. I've actually become a bit obsessed with cryptids since this experience. I started to research them, and I'm learning as much as possible about their habits and locations. Eventually, I did retire from my work with the FBI, and I'm now putting my skills to work becoming an expert on cryptid sightings around the country. I don't have anything online yet, but I am amassing a giant library of everything right here in my house. The same house where it all started with that one mind-blowing encounter. That's right. It started right here for me.